Tune in to the podcast and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Souls of Many.
What do you think?
May I comment?
Absolutely.
All right. So, Bridgette, my experience was a little different. But first of all, let me say this: that racism robs every community. And thank you for our sister from Croatia. Racism robs every community of the richness of individuals. You write them off, and you never get to discover who they are. And racism limits people that could have answers to some problems that we are faced with now. I went to St. Joe High School in Westchester. At that time, I graduated in '79, graduated with the famous basketball player Isaiah Thomas. But at that time, there was only about 50 African Americans, maybe 30 African Americans in the entire school. When we got there, you were black and you were white. Whether you're from Maywood, West Side of Chicago, Broadview, Bellwood, you were black. If you were from Cicero, Melrose Park, Berwyn, Old Brook, you were white. But when we got there, you were black and you were white. But after freshman year, you were a jock, you were a nerd, you were a burnout, whatever other category. So it went, whether good or bad, it went beyond race, and it started to look at your character and the group of people that you chose to be with. And again, you found people with common interests, and they got together regardless of their color. The unique experience about black, which makes it hard for us to overcome some of racism, is that we can't hide from it. If I'm from Italy, if I'm Jewish, if I'm Russian, if I'm Italian, if I'm Irish, I can assimilate in America, and I'm still like an American. But no matter where I go, I'm always going to be the black guy in the room, even though I'm light-skinned for some people, but I'm still considered the black guy in the room. So I wouldn't say that all of America is racist, but I would say that racism is present, and it's actually a disease that is affecting our nation. It could ultimately be the destruction of our nation, because believe me, there are powers that be out there that want to see America fall, just like the wall that divided Eastern and Western Germany. They want to see us fall like that. So I pray that we get together and truly judge each other by character and not by color.
Yeah, that's a great comment, Mike, and I can certainly appreciate that. It is true that wherever I go, I have to be conscious of who I am and where I am at all times. And so for some people, they just walk into a room. For others, I have to walk in, and I feel that I have to walk in put together, whether I'm at the Kmart, Walmart, or Neiman Marcus. I can't just go in looking humdrum. I have to be gussied up just a bit, especially in Neiman Marcus, Nordstrom, and so forth. I can just walk through the door looking like I just got out of bed and threw my hair back in a ponytail. I, too, have experienced what you experienced in high school. I experienced that I didn't go to a Catholic high school that was predominantly white like yours. I went to a predominantly black high school where sports was everything. Education was good too, but sports was everything. So we produced NBA players, MLB players, football players, and so it was a big, robust community in that regard. So what I was speaking to is my first real infusion into so many different cultures was my college experience. So after my first roommate, I got another white roommate, and Debbie was from a farm town. She too also jokingly had a big butt. So this was blowing my mind daily. But
large butt people.
It must be the farm. I'm not sure. I don't know. But anyways, Debbie's parents were so racist. I mean, incredible racist. I mean, when they first came to unpack her, They looked me up from head to toe. It was just the weirdest feeling I had ever experienced by any adult, because we were raised to really respect adults and treat them and honor them and so forth. These people were looking at me with a kiss of death. And I didn't know what to do with that. So I just walked out of the room and went wherever I went. And so Debbie and I got along just fine. But her parents made it a point that before that semester was up, she would be leaving my room. We would no longer be roommates. And we weren't, you know. And after that, you know, you gravitate to your communities that you feel comfortable with and in. And I got a single, which was kind of nice. So I could have visitors come and hang out and so forth. But it was just kind of disheartening to see that people see you so different and they prejudge who you are, and just based on my pigmentation. That is just incredibly sad, because I would never do that to another person, assume that they're bad, negative, or going to cause harm if I don't know them, or it would be different if I was in an area that was predominantly like that. Then you got to keep your guard up. But those instances just make me believe that racism is just so deeply embedded in some people's families, generations, and it continues to be taught. And I wonder, at what point does it stop? So I go back to the question, is America racist? Sam, what do you think?
I was kind of, I wanted to hear Chuck's opinion before I made mine, because I have some thoughts based on my growing up in London, but I wanted to hear Chuck's opinion.
Well, it looks like you have the floor. Chuck.
I don't. Okay. I personally don't think America is a racist nation, but we do have racists that are here. I went to high school at Thornton in '75, and they had forced busing, and it was about 50% white, 50% black. And there was always that tension between the races. You could feel it. It was palpable. But I agree with Michael's analogy. After you're there for a while, you do congregate differently. I had some really good friends that were on the football team, loved playing football. Also in wrestling, there were mixed races in the teams, and you gained an identity around the teams as opposed to being a white guy or a black guy. I think the struggles were much more palpable back in the 70s. I think we've gotten better. I grew up in a family, my father was a racist. I didn't really get to know people, African-American people, until I was in high school. And it kind of helped me break through that, those things I was taught from my father. But I appreciate Michael's analogy of the Civil War and carpetbaggers, that people are invested in a conflict. And I think there are people out there in the nation that proselytize around conflict, that they kind of aggravate and create those situations of conflict instead of looking for points of commonality. I think that's where we'll break through. I think when we realize that we have more in common than we have in differences, I think that's where we break through. And Bridgette, I appreciated your insight. We went through the University of Illinois' MBA program together. That's where we know each other. And to me, she was my neighbor. She sat next to me in class and kind of helped me get off the wall sometimes when I was getting frustrated. And I appreciated that probably more than she knows. So, but I don't think we are as a whole, a racist nation.
Chuck, I'm curious, and thanks for those kind words. I didn't know I was putting you back on the rail, so to speak. You were always so gracious and just a great partner to sit next to during the program. So I just enjoyed you and your wisdom and different perspective. But at any rate, when you say your dad was a racist, I'm curious to know what that was like. What was that?
I don't know. It was primarily in comments that he would make, listening to the news when he was an alcoholic as well. So he was a really difficult growing up in that environment. But I made my decision early in life that I was going to be different than my father. I consciously made a decision that that whatever I became, it would not be him. And that was one of the things. Alcoholism, I rarely drank. I just don't believe in what he believed in. It was an unusual experience.
I can understand that. I really truly can. The more I talk to people about this, it does seem that people will come and make their decision based on their dynamic in their space. So if you were raised by a racist and you're in a space that continues to fester in that environment, the likelihood that you will become a racist is great. It's hard to break that cycle, and it's hard to break up that community when you're continually perpetuated in it. So I get that, and I understand that. Just from a human and a civility standpoint, I get it. I understand it. And Sam, you wanted to build on?
Yeah, I really loved your response, Chuck. It was very, very well put. I have a unique perspective in that my father is British, never has worried about getting American citizenship, so he's still on a green card. And my mother is from Chicago, from Deerfield, Illinois, to be specific. So I spent most of my childhood. I wasn't born in London, but I moved at age 4 in 1999. So I grew up in London, and to answer sort of the original question, which was sort of when did you understand that people were different? The school system is incredibly different in the UK in that they don't teach this stuff. And I talked to my mom yesterday sort of about this, and she was like, well, yeah, I remember being in school in 3rd grade and having like a good month of curriculum dedicated to racism. And I said, oh, that's interesting that it was taught, because it was not discussed, taught, anything in the UK. We did not talk about it. It wasn't something that was evident. And we had, there were black kids in the class. I can't say African-American because they're not American. But I just remember specifically the one kid, his name was Jordan, and his dad ran sort of the dance class for kids after school. So he was somebody that I always interacted with. He was such a huge part of my life. And I thought he was the coolest kid ever, just like the coolest kid, like he was fast. He was a youth gymnast for the British Olympic team. So he could do all these backflips. And I just thought the kid was the coolest thing since sliced bread. And I was watching Fawlty Towers one day, which is an old British TV show starring John Cleese. And there's a scene where the old major general, British major general, comes up and says the N-word. It's a joke, and I remember just being confused because the laugh track came on, and I was like, "What is that word?" And I must have been 8 or 9 years old, and I remember asking my mom, "What is that word? I don't understand that word." And she very carefully explained to me sort of the connotation of things. And as I sort of got it, I was like, So it would be really, really bad for me to walk up to Jordan and say that word. So that was the first time that I realized that these kids were even different. I just thought he was cool. I wanted to be fast like him and athletic like him, and I was neither of those things. So that was a big thing, and we moved back to Chicago in 2006. And the school and classroom environment had, first off, a lot more African American kids. So that's one thing. But the kids were talking about this stuff openly. And specifically, I remember kids being it was a very similar situation. There was lunch tables and I didn't have any friends. So I sat at my own sort of individual lunch table. And there was definitely, you see the lunch table of cool kids. And over there, I remember very specifically, they were making fun of this one kid for being an Oreo. And I was so confused by the whole situation. I was still sort of head spinning because I had grown up with soccer. I knew nothing about basketball and football, which is all these kids wanted to talk about. And then I was like, the Oreo, like what a word, what a concept. And it very negatively affected this kid. And I could see it, sort of my first 3 months of school being there. And it wasn't until, and I wasn't a cool kid, so I wasn't at that table, but it wasn't until we had standardized testing and I was randomly put next to that same kid that we became fast friends. And that just sort of felt natural to me. But I noticed that our relationship wasn't based on, saying, calling him an Oreo or anything like that. We became friends because we both liked the show Family Guy. It just didn't really occur to me. But I noticed that once we had become friends, that his mood lifted greatly, that he didn't have to spend time with those kids. So that's sort of the first question as far as my context of when I noticed that people were different. And then the second question, is America racist? My mother, I talked to yesterday, was having a conversation with my father, who is British, and he said, I don't understand why America has all these problems. We don't have these problems in England. And I said, that's horse crap, for lack of a better word. And it's horse crap because it wasn't taught in England, we didn't talk about it, right? So that's when I mean that there's overt and subvert racism. Calling the kid an Oreo when I've moved back, that's overt racism. The subvertive racism was present in the school that I grew up in England, in that there were only 2 Black kids in the class. We had one Indian kid in the class, I believe, and that was it. It was 3 out of, we had 2 classes in the same year, so it was 60 kids, 3 out of 60. And when I moved back to the States, the class that we had at Grace Lutheran was around about 30 kids, and I think there was maybe 10, or maybe not, maybe it was more like 6, but it was certainly an increase in the amount of different people that I interacted with. So as far as, I'll start by answering a different question, is Britain a racist country? And yes, it can't be, because there's not overt racism, being in your face like that. England doesn't have a history with slavery in the same way that the U.S. does. It's very much a part of the country. So when I think about, is the U.S. a racist country, the history of slavery makes me say yes. And I had a fantastic Black Studies professor who has since passed in college, who presented an interesting theory that racism is not is a construct designed not to control Black people by making them subservient, but to control poor white people. And his was a Marxist argument that if the poor white people really realized how poorly they're being treated in the country, they would revolt. And thus, racism is put in place strategically to prevent that. And I thought that was a very interesting point. So in that sense, when you say that there are racists in the country, I believe that those racists have been taught, and that the systems that we put in place starting in 1776 have deemed this a racist country. Do I think that we can progress and move forward? Yes. But as it stands now, absolutely.
It's a great perspective. I can understand that, but more importantly, I appreciate that perspective because you're in a different generation, so you see different things, and your generation sees things a little bit more with passion, a little bit more objectivity, and you'll listen to your parents, but then you'll grab the research and challenge your parents, on that part of it, and so. I think you guys are our saving grace here if we're going to stomp this thing out, because I think in the generations that are beyond the boomers, I'm not saying they're a lost generation at all. I'm just saying that generation is very problematic.
Yeah. And if I could add one more thing to what I said, as far as Chuck's article, which I really appreciated, the Martin Luther King quote that everybody uses, the "I have a dream" speech, the dream is realized. It's here. It's here now. In that, I work in a media company. All of my friends, my peers, my coworkers are Black. The people I live with are Black. And I don't see the Black first. I see Barry, who is a chef in Wicker Park. Those are people I interact with. That dream is here. Those people being judged by the content of their character, that dream is here. But that does not mean, in my opinion, that the country is not racist. Because we still have a lot more to go. I think the dream, not to disrespect Martin Luther King's memory, but the dream is sort of a low bar. And on an individual level, it's here. But on a systemic level, it needs to be pushed forward.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm hearing you, and you say that, I have a dream that one day, we'll all be able to go and join hands and sing and do this. That's reflective in the music. You can appreciate rap. I can appreciate classic music. So, that's there. Integrated schools have come to fruition. That's there. And that was part of his dream. So what I hear you saying is that perhaps the playing field isn't there.
Yeah, I would agree. Okay.
And according to some definitions of racism, you've got microaggressors. You've got systemic things in the banking institutions, you've got systemic things in, I want to say, and this is a hard topic for me too, but I have to be truthful, in law enforcement as well. There's lots of folks in my family that most all people were in the military in my family from the Civil War. My great-great-grandfather was a musicaner in the Civil War with the Confederates. He was a slave. He had to do what he was told. So, he couldn't fight with the Union. He had to fight with the not fight, but he had to do what he was told, which was play music for the Confederates. My great-grandfather was also in the war. My dad was in World War II. And my nieces and my nephews have all served. So just circling back to the point that there's just so much inside our institutions that I know about. And even in our education systems, it's not right. It's just not a fair playing field. It isn't. And a lot of that goes back to Merriam-Webster's definition of how racism is systemic in institutions, especially in this country. And so when you look at it and you take it from a broad level and you bring it to a micro level, you see it. And Chuck, I'm going to give you an example in our MBA program where it was just unreal. I don't know if it was racism or just, I can't imagine, professors just seeking you out and just not liking you or whatever, because they really don't know you. But I think the expectation in our education systems are embedded in some professors so deeply that we're inferior thinkers, that we're inferior writers, that we're inferior articulators, that they come with that preconceived notion and they mark your grade down. I had to challenge so many of my grades, so many in an MBA program in the 21st century.
So did I.
That is insane. So you're saying you did as well, and I'm going to really circle back to you on that to see where you were with that. But it was just crazy that I can clearly recall just an instance going to taught this class, and I had to deviate from my group because they were going down one road and I knew the answer to these problems. And so after we received our grade, I kind of went in the circle and huddle with folks. And it's just that tension when you walk into a circle and nobody looks like you. The reaction that you get from some people and professors, it's just astounding no matter what you do, no matter how you say hello, whatever. And it could be just some people may not be familiar with you. They may not like you. That's ignorance too, to, just brush someone off when you don't treat anyone else in that circle and you're engaging, But anyways, I walked up and I said, so if this slope had gone this way and I'm challenging the problem and coming up with my answer that I gave, he just looked at me like, he didn't even give me an answer. He just looked at me like, why are you even talking to me right now? And so I said, I just went through the problem again. And I said, I'm just curious if that would be the right answer, which was the answer that I was going to give, but my teammates didn't want to give that answer. And then he said, yeah, just real matter of fact, and kept talking to the other group. And so I was noticing my grades were just being marked all kind of crazy. And I challenged another professor. And I only had problems with two professors. I challenged another professor, and he would always give the lower mark. And I went through and I said, I answered all of this. I articulated to all of that. Why did I get a B minus? Who wants a B minus in a grad program? I certainly didn't. I said, why is this a B minus when all of these points were hit? And so he marked it back up to like an A minus. And he did that several times. And it made me wonder, do you think that I'm just not smart or witty when it comes to this or whatever. But it's just those kind of things. You just constantly have to challenge when you don't really want to challenge. It's very uncomfortable to challenge. And when you go to challenge, there's immediate pushback. And there's just like, yes.
I mean, cut you off when you're done. I'm sorry.
I was just going to allude to one other thing, and then you can chime in. And so I know, Chuck, you said you had to challenge some grades or whatever, but then I looked at my son who was having a really hard time. And he was having a hard time in high school. And here it was, he was in honors and AP, he was fluent in Japanese, he was fluent in German, and no one noticed this kid. He played basketball and he rowed. So you should know his name, but it just felt like he was invisible his entire high school. And so he received some inferior grades that I knew that his mother looking over this stuff, I'm not the sharpest tech in the box, but I do know a little bit about something. And I just couldn't understand his grades. So I challenged them and they changed them right away. And then I went to the dean and she said, this should never be. And then we had to go all the way up to the superintendent. I mean, it was impacting him getting into a college, whether or not they were going to let his GPA go above where the grades got challenged, if it was going to be the real GPA or the other GPA that was just going to sit there and not get him into a Big Ten university. And I said, you guys have got to be kidding me. You know what they told me, which really made me look back on my MBA days, look on my other college days, and looking at this kid? The superintendent said, when I brought my son in, I don't want to say his name, but when I brought him in to articulate, and I didn't tell him what we were doing or whatever, I didn't play, and push him that way. I wanted him to get a taste of the real world and be able to explain himself. And he went in, he explained himself. They were blown away. The superintendent, the assistant superintendent, they were in this meeting, and this is what they told me, which just blew my mind. They said, wow, if we had known who you were, this would be really different. Are you kidding me? If you knew who he was, just grade him and give him what he deserves so that he can move on through life. But it wasn't like that for him. And he had a terrible experience. And so he went on to college and did great things from a global perspective. And I was glad that he chose the college in Switzerland. It cost us a pretty penny, and, we're still digging out of the hole, I think. But, it was worth it because I know what happened in my college years. I knew that Black guys were being disproportionately killed on college campuses, stopped, expelled, all these things. And I just didn't want him to have that experience. He made the decision for himself, but I was glad when he made that decision. I was like, you rock. You're going to go all the way to Switzerland? Are you kidding me? By yourself? You don't know a person, not one person. And he was like, yeah, it just feels right. That's what he told me. And he said that it was the best experience of his life. He got to see a different country every semester, South Africa, all over Europe. He got to experience the world the way it is and the beauty in all cultures. And that is what I just wanted for him. I wanted him so to experience just a global perspective so that when he came home, I told him, you can make a difference. I want you to make a difference. No matter what you do, make a difference. And so, I don't know. I think that institutional and systemic racism is embedded so deep that we don't even recognize it sometimes. It's just second nature. And he experienced some things with American professors over there. He had a friend in the same class, didn't know anything about the subject, and she admitted it. And she said, my papers were horrible. His papers were good. I always got the A. He always got the B. So that just opened my eyes even more. I said, we've got so much work to do because it's just so embedded in our institutions that, it just happens before you know it. And so, Mike, I know that you wanted to chime in, so please.
So I want to let you know it's so hard for a guy that talks for a living to be quiet. So if I talk too much, it's the mute button. All right, so a couple things. If America, when you ask the question, is America a racist nation? Well, we know that when the Constitution was written, Declaration of Independence, and all those things, that we were slaves at the time. Most of us, for the most part, if we were here. And if America is racist, we learned it, Sam, from Great Britain, because they were the fathers of colonialism, which still have an impact on many countries in Africa and even the Caribbean. So we learned it from the motherland, which would be Great Britain. The pressure, and Glenn Rivers, our homeboy, who is now the coach of the Philadelphia 76ers, talked about the pressure of being Black. And one thing I want to say, Chuck, too, I'm also a police chaplain for the city of Naperville. So I do support proactive, good policing, and I think we have. I know no community is perfect, but I think we have a great police force here in Naperville. But pressure, as Bridgette alluded to, that when I feel a sense of every African American, from the first one to hit the shore to the future African American children, to be successful, not to go to jail, not to do things that embarrass our people or embarrass my parents who are not here anymore. But there's pressure. When I don't know if everybody else, other races, feel the pressure. I mean, because we are always thought to be ignorant, so we have to prove. We have to have the extra measure to prove ourselves that we're not ignorant, that we're just as intelligent, that we can be just as successful. Nobody has handed me anything on a golden platter. I had to work for everything. By the grace of God, I have. But there's an extra piece of pressure when you're African American, to, at least in my experience, and Bridgette, I think you were saying that yourself, to that you just can't be average. You got to be better. I don't know if America is racist as a nation, but we could definitely say that there are certain institutions that exude racist tactics, and again, by prejudging people, making things harder for people of color to achieve. But even though those things exist, there's no excuse. I think every man is responsible for their own choices in life, and you can be successful in any country, any place in the world. Going back to another point too, when we were talking about carpetbaggers and using racism as a way to keep poor white people oppressed as well, and have poor white people pointing fingers at black people. But the whole, it's my understanding that how the KKK, Ku Klux Klan, was started was that there were wealthy landowners who wanted to separate the poor white people and the black people that were given new rights under Reconstruction. And so that's how the whole thing really started. And so, we've been dealing with these things. And you talk about institutional racism. As a pastor, I would probably tell you that the church is just as guilty, because when you think about it, there are several mega churches that are led by white pastors that have great populations of black people. Right? Name me any African American pastor that has a great population of white people. I mean, they may like T.D. Jakes, but it's not a mega church in Dallas because of the white population. Or they may, but you go to Joel Osteen, it's a Rainbow Coalition in there. So, and some people said that 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is one of the most segregated times in our country. So, Bridgette, I agree that there is institutional racism in certain institutions, but I even though I know our nation was started by racism that affected Native Americans, it affected Africans Americans as well. But again, somehow we got to overcome these things. Am I optimistic? Yes, because of young men like Sam and my new friend in Wisconsin, Chuck, and my sister from a neighboring town from Maywood to Berkeley. Again, thank you for giving me the opportunity. I'm done.
For now. that was really, really good perspective. Sue, I'm interested in your perspective. Is America racist?
Well, I can go on and on and on, and I'm a bit pressed for time, but I must say one thing. Yes. America is racist. The world is racist. The entire world has been racist since God created the earth, because he intended to have a perfect world, perfect people, and that did not happen. So we will always have racism, discrimination. And the only difference that will make it a big difference so we can have the likes of Martin Luther King again, great leaders of today, like your son and my son, hopefully, Bridgette, and Abe Lincoln as well. to have diversity in faith, and I always just use God, not Christianity or anything like that, but to have faith, to unite. If you make a difference in changing one life to see what we see, like the lives of our children, then you've made a big difference. But right now, we are under severe attack and oppression by, as Michael indicated, I will not say KKK, but great wealth. And the wealth has the power in the media, in the schools, and everywhere else.